Tonight's speaker is J.W. Ocker. He's the creator of oddthingsi'veseen.com, where he writes about his visits to oddities of nature, history, art, and culture. His first two books, the New England Grimpendium and the New York Grimpendium, are travelogues of his visits to deathly sites in those regions, and they both won awards from the Society of American Travel Writers. His book Poeland, the Hallowed Haunts of Edgar Allan Poe, that's a tongue twister, is a travel diary of his time trekking to Poe sites, Edgar Allan Poe sites, and his other book of Season of the Witch, Magic and Mayhem of Halloween in Salem. He actually moved with his family for the month of October to Salem and wrote an account of his experiences there. His first novel, Death in Douglas, is a middle grade novel about a boy who lives in a funeral home. He's got another work of fiction, the novel 12 Nights at Rotter House, which I've read and is fantastic. The horror novel for adults. And his next book is coming out next month, comes out in September. It's called Cursed Objects, Strange But True Stories of the World's Most Infamous Items. And that'll be out next month. His work has also appeared in the Boston Globe, on CNN, on The Atlantic, in The Guardian, and he's got a column in New Hampshire Magazine, some of you may have seen recently. He lives in Nashua, New Hampshire, and longtime fans of New Hampshire Humanities will remember that I interviewed J.W. Ocker on our Real Witches of New Hampshire podcast last year. So please join me in welcoming tonight's presentation from J.W. Ocker.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, you interviewed me right here in this room, actually, if you remember correctly, right back there in that chair. Awesome. Let me share my screen, make sure that's working okay. Let's see here. Okay, you guys should be seeing a big black New Hampshire. Is that correct? Awesome. Great. So I do appreciate you guys showing up and listening to me talk about some of the odd things I've seen in New Hampshire. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this in a different way than I often do it. Sometimes I just tell stories that I've seen and show pictures of the stuff I've been to. But I kind of want to prove a thesis with you guys. And I've done this a few times as well, and I've never done one in New Hampshire. And I want to do it in New Hampshire. And to prove that thesis, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Fortunately, Trisha told you enough that I don't have to go deep, so that's great. I can get right to the oddities. But you need to know a little bit about me in order for this thesis to make sense. So I am a travel writer, but usually that phrase "travel writer," when it comes to your head, you think very specific thoughts, a very specific thing about travel writers, and it's just not true about me. Usually think of there you go. Usually think of, backpacking through Europe and learning insights into human nature and yourself. That's not me at all. You also think of, taste testing cocktails in the latest Paradise Island. Also not me. What I do as a travel writer is I visit weird and spooky stuff. That's 100% what I do. And, again, fortunately, Trisha went through this already, but this is the kind of weird stuff I visit. I visit death-related items, cemeteries, stuff related to, oddities of nature, oddities of arts, oddities of culture and history. Anything that sticks out to me as weird, often that ends up being macabre. For some reason, that's one of my veins I mind a lot. But it could be anything odd, anything weird that sticks out to me. And the way I got started as a travel writer was wasn't professionally. I wasn't given an assignment by a magazine. I didn't have like a travel stipend or anything like that. I wasn't acknowledged. I was a dude in an apartment. What I did to become a travel writer is I jumped in my car and I drove 15 minutes away, saw something I thought was odd that I'd heard about, and then wrote about it for my website, which is oddthingsi'veseen.com. And that's all I did. Just one Saturday morning I did that. And then the next Saturday I did it again. And then the next Saturday I did it again, half an hour away, an hour away. I take vacations and spend those doing road trips, finding oddity. And that just kind of snowballed into, a site with hundreds of articles on it, the books that Trisha told you about, the articles and other publications. And I became a full-fledged professional, travel writer. But again, all it was is just jumping in my car and going to see something. And over the course of doing that, I've been doing that for about 10 years, 12 years. Over the course of doing that, I've come up with this maxim that I think is pretty true. And that is that within a tank of gas of anywhere in this country are astounding oddities and wonders. That's it, within a tank of gas. Now, whenever I'm talking about the Midwest, I will caveat this one. I will say within a tank or two of gas, because man, the Midwest just won't stop going. It's like just land forever, skies that make you immediately agoraphobic. It's just a little bit different place. But here, in mountain and forest nestled New Hampshire, This is quadruply true, quintuply true. There is stuff all over the place that is odd and weird and worth going on any given Saturday. So what I want to do is prove this thesis to you. I'm going to prove this thesis to you with a real actual road trip that we're going to take right now, but that anybody could take tomorrow or next, if you're in New Hampshire. I know not all of you are in New Hampshire, and thank you so much for coming to hear about New Hampshire. But if you're in New Hampshire, you could take this trip tomorrow. So it has to be a practical trip. It has to be doable. It can't be something that kind of like, it just kills you because you have to strain it too much. It has to be a real trip. So in order to set that trip up, it also has to be packed with oddity. It can't just be one thing. It needs to be a multi-site oddity trip because that's kind of how I like to do it. So we're going to see 8 different oddities tonight in this road trip, but it's going to be an extremely doable trip. So to kind of start that, I need to define a few terms because there's a lot to kind of assume here. And the first is that, what is a tank of gas? Like, how far can a tank of gas get us, right? The answer to that is, who knows? It depends on everything. The roads, the car, the type of combustion, all of it depends. So what I've done is just kind of boiled it all down to 300 miles. That is how far a tank of gas gets us. Now, that's a long ways. I mean, the state of New Hampshire is only about 250 feet long from the bottom to the top, from Massachusetts to Canada, about 250 feet tall, 250 miles tall. So technically, this gets us all over New Hampshire. Obviously, it only gets us in a straight line. You have to go in a straight line to do that. But it's a big distance. But the problem here is this needs to be a practical road trip. So I can't just drive us all 300 miles out into the forest, drop us off and say, that was a trip. That was 300 miles. Look at all the oddities we saw. It doesn't work. It's not practical. So it needs to be door to door. So it needs to be a real trip. It needs to be door to door. And so that means we can't go 300 miles. That means the farthest way we can go is 150 miles. That's how far we can go and get back on that same tank of gas. Now, normally I've done this talk a few places. Never, like I said, never New Hampshire. And I always start the trip wherever I'm at. So if I'm doing it at a library in Rhode Island, the trip starts at that library and ends at that library. If I do it at a museum in Nevada, starts at that museum, ends at that museum. Obviously, in these days, we are not going to be able to do that because we're all over the place, all of us. Like I said, some of us outside of New Hampshire. So what we're going to do is starting in that trip where I live, where I am right now, where this room is, and that's Nashua, New Hampshire. Now, that brings up a whole new constraint. So as you can see, we're kind of constraining it, almost like a magic trick. I'm trying to make it harder and harder and harder to find lots of oddity. And then we'll see if I can find lots of oddity in that kind of constrained circle. But the reason why it's a new constraint is with Nashua, it's at the southern end of New Hampshire. If I go farther south in Nashua, I'm in Massachusetts, and that's kind of illegal for this conceit. We want to do a New Hampshire road trip because that's the topic of the conversation. Also, because it's sponsored by a New Hampshire organization. Obviously, if it's a real road trip, you can cross borders. I think the rules are changing these days. You can cross borders. I'm pretty sure New Hampshireites can go anywhere. But for this trip, we can't go south, which takes off an entire cardinal direction off of our list. We can't go down there. So we have to find these 8 oddities within a 150 mile radius, but only going northeast and west. So that looks like this. So for those of you not in New Hampshire, the black lines are New Hampshire. We're shaped like a triangle or an upturned gun. And that blue circle is our radius. That's how far we can go at 150 miles and then turn around and come back, which is it's a big chunk of New Hampshire. We can get to most of New Hampshire here. We can't get to the corner pocket down there, and we can't get to the very top, but we can get to most of New Hampshire. But the problem is this circle covers a big chunk of Vermont, a big chunk of Maine, and some blue. So those are off limits for this trip. Again, another constraint, which is not too bad. I've done this talk on the coast of Massachusetts where 75% of this circle was blue. It was all Atlantic Ocean. And so we had to find those oddities in a very small pie slice of the circle. But there we go. That is our constraint. So I wanted to set this up. We're going to find 8 oddities in a road trip that anybody can do, and pack it full of stories. It's still going to be a packed road trip. It's going to be an experience. So with that in mind, we'll do the road trip, and at the very end, we'll test the thesis. We'll see if it worked out. So stop number 1 for us is Kingston. We're going to go to Kingston. Only 20 miles away for the first stop. Not a bad leg. And we're going to a graveyard. Now, I always put graveyards on road trips every single time. And the reason for that is, first off, I've been to graveyards all over the country, all over the world really, but all over the country. And New England has the best graveyards of the entire country. I say that with absolute confidence that we have the best graveyards in the entire country. The reason why I love graveyards are full of nature, full of art, full of stories, full of history. And every once in a while, you get a famous person's grave, so you can get really close to a famous person, well, 6 feet away from a famous person. And it's just, they're full of like just all this really cool stuff, and they're never crowded, right? There are just places you can have to yourself that are beautiful. So I always try to put graveyards on here. I put a couple on this trip, actually, for different reasons, but I put a couple on this trip. And the other thing I've done with this trip is I've tried to make it COVID safe. So what that means is I've tried to keep us in places that aren't a ton of people. Like there's no, with one exception, and I'll tell you why it's an exception. This is going to be places you can go and be outside, not be around lots of people, no like admission fees. So you're kind of, you know, so whatever your risk tolerance, this is a COVID safe trip, which again, graveyards are extremely COVID safe. They're open. They're not very populated. Everybody is, you know, socially distanced 6 feet. It's just downward. They're all socially distanced. It's a perfect spot for us. So we're going to this one in Kingston. But it's not this is one of those graveyards that isn't one of the best graveyards. It's not pretty. It's not got a lot of history to it, but what it has is very special. It has the graves of Betty and Barney Hill. Who are Betty and Barney Hill? This is Betty and Barney Hill. Betty and Barney Hill are the world's most famous alien abductees. Their story has influenced all of culture for the past 60 years. Their story of alien abduction, whether you believe it or not, has set a template for alien abduction. Like nobody can have an alien abduction story, whether it's a novel or whether it's a real life one, without using all the terms that Betty and Barney Hill brought into real life. Before Betty and Barney Hill, UFO stories were just lights in the sky and some crashes, right? Roswell in 1947. But Betty and Barney Hill made alien abduction a thing. So terms like hypnotic regression, missing time, anal probes, all of those we know in culture because of these two people and what they experienced or what they claim to experience. So very important piece of UFO lore came out of New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a lot of extraterrestrial sites, just for some reason. I don't know if we got onto the intergalactic brochures, but we have a lot of UFO hotspots. But these guys are important, again, for storytelling reasons. Their story got out. It was written as a book called The Interrupted Journey. That was picked up by James Earl Jones and turned into a movie in the 1970s, a made-for-TV movie that he starred as Barney Hill. So it got a lot of attention, and again, made, you know, the X-Files probably wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the story of Betty and Barney Hill. So what is that story? Let's tell that story. So Betty and Barney Hill, it was the night of September 19th, 1961, and over into September 20th. So because it was a late night, they were driving over midnight. So 19th and 20th, 1961, they were driving back from vacation in Montreal to their home in Exeter. So basically they were coming down all of New Hampshire. Back then it was all old Route 3. Today, a lot of old Route 3 is still there, but some of it's, you know, overlaid with Interstate 93. So you can basically still trace their route. And at some point, at some point in this route, you know, in the late night, dreamy, quiet hours on the road kind of feeling, they started seeing lights follow them, or what they thought were lights following them. They pulled over, Barney jumped out, grabbed his binoculars, went out to the middle of a field for a better look, terrified himself back into the car, and they took off, went home. That was the entire experience. But once they got home, they started having weird dreams, weird memories. They went to a hypnotic regression specialist, and they pieced together this story of what they think they actually experienced on that trip. And what they think actually happened was those lights got close enough to be seen as saucers, as actual ships. And then aliens came out, took them into the ship, performed various experiments on them that we're all kind of familiar with just from culture and stories and movies, and then let them go, you know, some kind of intergalactic catch and release program. They just, that simple. Didn't remember it at first, didn't remember it till, you know, days, weeks later. And then the aliens they described, this is kind of interesting. The way that Barney described them was as Irishmen. He saw very pale people with red hair, dressed like Nazis is how he described them, very militant uniforms. Meanwhile, Betty described them more as grays. So there's a really interesting thing. Barney was a big civil rights activist, and obviously as an interracial couple back in the late 1950s and 1960s, they kind of had a very different perspective on life. And both of them even internally had a very different perspective, and were seeing this threat in different ways. So very interesting story, and from whatever direction you come at it, it's a very interesting story. But anyway, that's the whole story. They didn't have another UFO encounter really their entire lives. It was just one moment in time that somehow caught on fire across American culture, across UFO culture, across global culture. So these are the first alien abductees of the modern era. And they're New Hampshireites, which is kind of pretty awesome. So let's look at their graves. You go to their graves in Kingston. It's just a couple of plaques. They have a headstone for the family, but a couple of plaques. But you can see right on there, the interrupted journey is on both plaques. This event so defined their lives that it went on their epitaph. You know, usually it's just your name and your expiration dates. But in this case, it is the interrupted journey. They wanted that known. Now, you can see from their death years, Barney died 8 years later. He died in 1969. So he didn't really live a long life after that, nor did he live it really into the modern era where UFOs really got picked up, you know, the X-Files era. But Betty lived till 2004 for decades. She lived for decades, and she was really enmeshed in the culture. She was kind of a celebrity in UFO culture. So she really kind of embraced that. So again, just us driving around, jumping in our car and driving 28 miles away from Nashua, we get to see this. Now, if you're super into the story, which I still am, I'm really obsessed with the story. There's a lot of sites in New Hampshire you can see that are related to Betty and Barney Hill. For instance, they have a historic sign out in Laconia, the Betty and Barney Hill incident, just as serious as a Franklin Pierce plaque or a Daniel Webster plaque. They have their own plaque to see close to the route where they took that fateful night. Out in Littleton, there's a gas station near the route as well, where they embrace it with both hands. They have a big mural on the side of the gas station. Inside, they'll sell you copies of the Interrupted Journey and tchotchkes, little aliens on keychains. And they have kind of poster boards around the walls that tell the story of Betty and Barney Hill and various other kind of UFO stories. And then the archives, the Betty and Barney Hill archives, are at the University of New Hampshire in Durham. They own the hypnotic regression tapes. They own the transcripts. They own the drawings that Betty and Barney did to kind of describe how the ships looked and the star charts they saw. So they have those clothes. This is the dress that that Betty Hill was wearing the night of the abduction. You can even see like a little swatch ripped out that she had tested to see if there's any like alien residues on it or whatever. But this is all at UNH, and they display it pretty regularly, but they let me paw my way through it one day, and it was like just amazing to read the transcripts. I couldn't hear them because they were out being digitized at the time, but to read the transcripts, to hold like the actual drawings that Barney did of the ship. It's just, again, I'm a big science fiction fan, so I look at this both as one of those kinds of stories, but also as a cultural story. Like that, whether it happened or not, it mattered enough to like really take fire in culture and to become kind of a cornerstone. So again, a fully New Hampshire experience from end to end. That's it. But these are not on our route. You have to drive. You have to have your own Betty and Barney Hill like themed road trip to see these things, which I do recommend. I actually recommend retrace their actual route. If you wait till next month, you can do it on the anniversary of their abduction. But all these things are around, but it's not on our route. The only thing on our route is their graves. But that's enough. That's enough of an intro into the story to like to have that. So we're back in the car, driving 22 miles. So again, a really short jaunt, 22 miles to the New Hampshire coast. Now, the New Hampshire coast is pretty small. We have 18.5 miles of ocean coast. We have tons of estuary coasts, lakes and ponds and rivers and stuff. But we have the smallest or the shortest ocean coast of any state in the country, or any ocean state in the country, I should say. 18.5 miles. But we pack some really cool stuff into those 18.5 miles, like drowned forests. So drowned forests, so once upon a time, thousands of years ago, the coast of New Hampshire extended farther out. And the land went just farther out into the ocean. And that land was like the rest of New Hampshire, forested and all the kinds of things that we always put on our travel brochures. But about 3,500, 4,000 years ago, kind of, whether I don't know the geology of it, ice ages or whatever, but the ocean came in and took back some of that land and buried those forests, those conifer forests under water, under ocean water, where obviously they died. You can't have trees in ocean water. But the remnants were left, the stumps of the trees, root systems, and it's called a drowned forest. There's two on the coast of New Hampshire. There's one on Ginnis Beach, which you can see at low tide every 20 years. It's like a very rare sight to see the Ginnis Beach drowned forest. But the second one at Odeon Point, you can see every single low tide. You have to go at low tide to see them, but you can see it at every single low tide. And in fact, I was just there last week and it took these photos. Well, no, the next slide isn't photographs, but I was just there last week and it took some photographs I want to show you. So this is Odeon Point, for those not familiar with it or those out of state. It's a beautiful atmospheric rocky beach. I love rocky beaches. I love rocky beaches way, way better than flat, boring sand beaches. I love going tide pooling and I love just the atmosphere. And we have some great rocky coastline. But this is kind of where you'll see the drowned forest. We also have, just like Betty and Barney Hill the drowned forest got its own historic marker on the side of the road up there. They call it a sunken forest here back when they made this, but most people call it the drowned forest because it's more evocative, I think, to do that. And if you look at this sign, I don't know who wrote this sign, but it's a brilliant last line. Intermingled with these gnarled stumps is the original Atlantic cable. Now, that original Atlantic cable was a telegraph cable connecting North America to Europe. One of the first ones laid, multiple ones were laid up and down the coast. Some didn't work, some worked, and eventually they're all replaced by fiber optics, right? After we stopped using the telegraph. But it's a very interesting thing to think of this 4,000-year-old drowned forest intertwined by, this man-made cable trying to talk to Europe. It's really interesting. And part of the interest of that is you can still see the remnants of that Atlantic cable as well at Odeon Point at low tide. You can see the pipe itself, and if you look right, you can find the drowned forest. And I'll show you those pictures now that I already teased. Again, you have to go at low tide, and you have to know what you're looking for. It's really easy to miss. They're covered in barnacles and hermit crabs and snails. They might look like driftwood if you're not looking right. You can see that they're almost like monocolored. Everything around them. That's not even my camera. That's literally the colors of the beach there. Some of them are on dry land. Some of them never get out of ankle deep water. Sometimes you have to like wade through there. But you can see that some of these are stumps with the tree rings highly visible. You can see this root system. It's this brown wood root system. And once you know they're there, there's probably at least, we saw probably a score different pieces of stump or root system. Again, on dry land and in water. And then snaking through it all is that massive cable there in the bottom corner, which is the remnants of the Atlantic cable, just sitting there. This 145-year-old artifact just sitting there. But if you go at high tide, that whole cable is gone. You can't see it. It's underwater. And of course, you have no chance of seeing the drowned forest. It's 4,000-year-old conifer forest that just died by drowning in salt water. But really cool. One of my favorite things in New Hampshire, honestly, this story of geological time and the remnants that we can see with their own eyes while we're laying out and feeding seagulls or whatever. But that is stop 2. Stop 3 is my outlier. So stop 3 is not COVID safe. It might be COVID safe. It's a restaurant, so depending on what they're doing, it might be COVID safe. But it is the Far Out Diner in Dover. So this is about 17 miles away. Still going north now. And the Far Out Diner is an alien-themed diner, breakfast and lunch place. So it has this gorgeous mural on the side of it with this massive alien abducting a dog off of a Black Ocean. I don't know. But it's a gorgeous, gorgeous mural. And I think they put that there because the front door is not as gorgeous, not as themed with aliens. But if you go into the diner, it is covered with pop culture, extraterrestrial bric-a-brac and tchotchkes. And it's a great little thing. And I put this on here. There's no story behind this restaurant. No story at all. It's just the owners thought it was a cool theme. And normally I wouldn't put a no story oddity on the route, but because we're trying to make this a practical route, we have to stop and eat, right? So I'm pretty obsessive about when I'm on these multi-site road trips. I don't want to stop and eat. If I stop and eat for an hour, that's an oddity I might not be able to see, or an hour and a half. But I'm usually traveling with my wife and my 3 daughters, and they're not as obsessive as I am about this, so they want to stop and eat. So I'm always pushing them for drive-through. But again, obviously eating at 65 miles an hour isn't all that much fun. So they really want to just sit down and stretch their legs at a restaurant. So what I found, the way I deal with that psychologically, is if I can find a restaurant that's also an oddity, it's a lot easier for me to hang out for an hour because I'm in the middle of an oddity. And those oddities can be thematic, like this one is just a thematic oddity, or they can be historical. There's a lot of great restaurants in historic buildings, in paranormal hotspots that really play it up really in a fun way. So adding that into it, a restaurant that's also the oddity, helps me out and makes these trips for me, a little better. But again, if you're not hungry, you can skip this one. Skip right over it. And if you did, though, our next stop is way up north, the Madison Boulder. Now, as you can see, it's a 61-mile leg. So pretty, the longest one we've had so far, they've been like 20, 30 miles. And I could have cut this off shorter. I could have found a closer oddity, but sometimes you just want to drive. Sometimes you don't want to get out every 20 miles. And obviously New Hampshire is a brilliant place for road trips. Just gorgeous country, especially if you're driving north. It is, you just want to you don't want to get out of your car. You just want to see the mountains, the forests. So I put a longer leg on here so that you can have that opportunity. But also because the Madison Boulder is really awesome. It's just a rock technically, but it is a pretty massive rock. So you get there, and obviously in a road trip, you can't do a hike in the middle of a road trip. That's just not practical to just stop and do a 4-hour trek to the forest to see something. That's not what a road trip is. That's hiking. So I picked something that's easy to get to. So this has a parking lot, like literally from your car to the Madison Boulder is about the width of a Walmart parking lot. So it's not a hike, but you are a little bit in the forest. So it's a nice little change of pace. Just came from the coast. Now we're in a forest. But it's really odd. You go on this path and you almost don't register this rock. It almost looks like sky and ground and trees, and you almost don't register at all. But then you get closer, and this is me for scale. It is a massive hunk of rock. It is 5,000 tons, about 88 feet long, 33 feet high, 27 feet wide, and it goes below ground here, another 10 feet. So this is lodged in here. So it's a massive rock, but the reason why it's special is it's a glacial erratic. And that means it doesn't belong right there. Where you're seeing it, that 5,000 ton rock, it does not belong where it's sitting. All the rock around it, this is granite, this is New Hampshire granite, but all the rock around it, all the bedrock, all the rocks that cut through the surface are a different kind of granite. That means this rock came from somewhere else. Now this is not another UFO story, but what happens was during the Ice Age, this rock, wherever it was on a flow of ice that just fractionally moved it along. Years of moving. So a fraction of an inch, a fraction of an inch, a fraction of an inch. And then over time, when the Ice Age dissipated, the ice underneath the rock left it, and then thump, it just landed where it landed, and it was there forever. Nobody's going to move the Madison Boulder. Which is an amazing idea that this is on its own little trek, its own little road trip, just a fraction of an inch every, who knows, year, 2 years. It's mind-boggling small amount of progress for it to get here. Experts don't know exactly where it came from. They know it's New Hampshire still, but I've heard estimates from as close as 2 miles away to 24 miles away. And anything in that range for a 5,000 ton rock is an amazing distance to journey. I also love it a lot because it looks man-made. It looks, because it's so symmetrical and so rectangular, it looks like the first building block of a giant's house, just thrown down there, and the rest of the house gets built. If you go around it, the back of it is a lot less symmetrical, more asymmetrical, but the front of it just looks like a clean-cut giant boulder just shoved right there in the middle of the forest. So again, it's the largest glacial erratic in New Hampshire, possibly the largest glacial erratic in all of North America, and definitely up there among the largest glacial erratics in the world. So it's a natural wonder that we can just park at and stroll a few hundred feet to see under nice skies and nice trees. So that's it. That's the next stop on our trip. Moving forward, so now we're going south. So now we are on the other part of the bend. We still have, what are we on, number 5, 6, 7, 8? We still have 4 stops to do, but now every mile gets us closer to my home. At least it gets us closer to our starting point. So we're going to go to another graveyard 30 miles away to the grave of Claude Reigns. This graveyard is in Moldenboro, Red Hill Cemetery, tiny little cemetery. You can see every single grave from the entrance. And we're going there for one person's grave, and that is Claude Reigns. Who's Claude Reigns? This is Claude Reigns. Claude Reigns was a big actor from the 20th century, from the early to mid, a little bit to the late 20th century. He was in Casablanca. He was in Now Voyager. He was in a lot of big films. In fact, it's rumored that he was the first ever actor in the history of Hollywood and cinema to be paid $1 million for just one movie. Hadn't been done before him. Obviously, we've broken that ceiling a bazillion times since then, but he was the first one to push actors over $1 million for one picture. I'm a big fan of him. Not necessarily for Casablanca, not necessarily for Now Voyager or any of the other ones he was in. I'm a big fan of him because Claude Reigns was the Invisible Man, as the Rocky Horror Picture Show told us. He was one of the Universal Studios horror monsters, one of the pantheon, the big ones, the big 6 or probably there's 6 of them, the big 6 that are, the foundation of all cinematic monsters. Now, the Invisible Man doesn't get as much of a rep, I don't think, as the other monsters. He did get actually, his movie was just remade earlier this year, completely reimagined, redesigned, a very smaller movie. Really good, though. But in general, he doesn't get a good rep because I think it's his face. He doesn't have a face, right? The Creature from the Black Lagoon has an amazing mask. Bela Lugosi as Dracula is amazing. And, of course, Boris Karloff in his Frankenstein makeup is definitely tattoo-worthy. These are all amazing visions. Whereas the Invisible Man is either headless or he has bandages wrapped around his face. So I think for that reason, he doesn't get as much press. However, he is the most fearsome of all of the Universal monsters. And that's because, so most of the Universal monsters are beasts that kind of are just acting according to their nature to survive, or they are misunderstood. They're not even really monsters in spirit. They just look different. But the Invisible Man is a maniac. He's a mass murderer. If you ever see the movie, the 1933 movie, he kills an entire trainload of people, hundreds of people, just because he can, just because he's invisible and can get away with it. He's crazy. He's like, he's more than a maniac. He's a megalomaniac. And it played amazingly well by Claude Reigns because, again, Claude Reigns had to act with no face. You only see Claude Reigns for a little bit at the end when the serum wears off and you see Claude Reigns' face. Otherwise, it's gauze or completely invisible. And he does an amazing job doing that. And he's buried in New Hampshire. The reason for that, he's from New England, or not England. He's from England. He's from Old England. So he's a British guy. But he settled in New Hampshire for his retirement years. And a lot of actors did that back then, actually. They did it because they were kind of tired of the rat race of New York. They wanted to get as far away from Hollywood as possible. Wanted to get far enough away from New York, but they still wanted to work. So they needed to be within a commuting distance of New York if they wanted to do a picture or a theater performance or something like that. So it was a good distance. Like these days with the plane routes, you can do that from anywhere. But back then, New England was a good place for it. So he retired to Moldenborough and was buried there. 1967 is when he died. When you're standing at the beginning of that graveyard and seeing every single grave, his really stands out. This black bullet, it was designed by him. That's why it's so unique. He designed it. He put the epitaph together. I think he pieced it together from poetry. He's buried there alongside of his wife in matching gravestones right there. Nice little spot, the foliage in the background. I love, watching the movie in the fall and then going to his graveyard on like a little road trip is like a perfect little kind of Halloween activity. His house is still there, the house he lived in. Obviously, it's a private house these days for somebody else. But this is kind of where he ended up. And the reason why I love this so much is I'm a huge Universal Monsters movie fan. I love the movies, but those movies couldn't be farther away from me in time or place. And they were made, 60 years before I was born, maybe not, actually less than that, but a long time ago. And they were made the width of the country away. So it couldn't be further away from me in time or place. So the fact that I can have this physical connection with these movies by going to a graveyard, and really that's the theme of everything here is this physical connection, seeing the Madison Boulder, putting your hand right on the Madison Boulder, hearing the story of Betty and Barney Hill, but seeing their graves, seeing this actor after you see him perform in the movie, it just makes everything more real, makes the world more real, I find, to do this. But anyway, we paid our respects. Claude Reigns is the Invisible Man. We jump back in the car, and we're going to something that should have been a grave, but is not, the Memorial Arch of Tilton, which is in Northfield, which is next door to Tilton. And we'll tell that whole story in a second. So you go to not Tilton, you go to Northfield, and you go to this park, the 150-foot hill, very beautiful, nice view of everything. And there's this big, massive monument, 55 feet tall, 40 feet wide. That sarcophagus with the marble sarcophagus with the lion on top, I think it's 12 feet tall. Massive, giant, massive. Beautiful spot. And in fact, if you skipped eating at the Far Out Diner, you can throw down a blanket and have a picnic right here in the park. What this is supposed to be, what's a monument is what it is. A really cool architectural monument is what it is today. What it was supposed to be was a sarcophagus. There was supposed to be remains in that lion-topped marble sarcophagus. There's not, though. It's empty. It's completely not. It's completely body-free. But the remains that are supposed to be in there are one Charles Tilton. Now, Charles Tilton was born in Tilton next door, but it wasn't called Tilton when he was born there. We'll get to that in a second. He was born in Tilton area, went west, made his fortune, made a lot of money out west, and then came back to his hometown and really invested in it. Just put a lot in the infrastructure. He put a lot of statues up. If you go to Tilton today, there's these statues that don't really fit in with the New England town. They're like mythological kind of. He bought those to beautify his hometown. And in fact, he did so much for the town that the people named the town after him while he was alive, while he was still alive. And I don't know for sure if it was out of the goodness and largesse of their hearts or if he kind of pressured them with money. But however he did it, they named the town after him, which is amazing to me. It's like me sitting here in Nashua and somebody coming to me and saying, hey, JW, from now on, Nashua is named Ocker. You now live in Ocker, New Hampshire. And it just, I can't imagine that. But I assume it would give me a very big head, which is what I assume Charles Tilton had because he already was a rich guy and rich people have very big heads. But we know for a fact with Charles Tilton because he started thinking about his legacy. And he was like, you know what? I want a giant grave. I want people to visit my grave from afar and see my mighty works and just kind of have a picnic at my grave. That's what he wanted to do. So he looked around, he found this perfect hill in Northfield. He bought it, he erected this thing on top of it. And his plan was he didn't want to get buried in Northfield dirt. He wanted to get buried in dirt named after him. So he thought his plan was, I'll just pay them enough money, Northfield, enough money to let Tilton annex it. I can't remember if he was trying to get them to annex the whole town or just this hill, but that was his plan. Money would talk and they would buy it off of him. So he built it, he bought the land, he built it, and then he went to Northfield and they're like, nah. They said, it's your land, you bought it. It's private property, build whatever you want on it, but the zip code is going to be Northfield. Sorry. So money couldn't buy everything. So what Charles Tilton did, he did the equivalent of the kid at the playground who gets mad, so he takes their ball and goes home. That's what Chuck did. He got mad, except in this case, that ball was his corpse. So he took it home because he had to be buried in soil named after him. So he's buried in Tilton today in an everyday man's grave. Grave I'll have one day. It's just a bare, boring square of cement or granite with my name on and expiration dates on it. So this is what he chose over that massive monument he built because, you know, what you kind of get. You want to get buried in the town named after you, I assume. I don't know. I've never had that happen to me. So now, you know, it's now Northfield's pride and joy. You know, they advertise it. They have signs pointing the way to it. They want people to come visit it. And it is a beautiful construction and a beautiful spot and a great place to stop. So thanks, Charles Tilton, for that. But, you know, sorry it didn't work out for you that, you know, you're not hanging out with us while we're picnicking at the park. All right, so we're going onward. We're going onward, and we're going a bit more morbid, honestly. I'll warn you in advance, the last two stops. We're going to go down 24 miles. Again, really bite-sized treks. And we're going to the Josie Langmaid Monument in Suncook/Pembroke. It's a little bit liney. We're going to the Three Rivers Academy, where across the street is a forest, and on the edge of that forest is this monument right here, a very plain-looking column. Now, if we were driving past it and didn't know what it was, we would assume it's to the founders or something really boring. We have a lot of boring monuments in the United States that are just not interesting at all. But then we'd miss out on a very, very interesting story if we did that. So we're stopping, and we're going to read the inscription that is facing the road. And that inscription says, erected by the citizens of Pembroke and vicinity to commemorate the place of the tragic death and memory of Josie A. Langmaid, a student of Pembroke Academy, who was murdered on her way to school on the 4th day of October, 1875, age 17 years, 9 months, 27 days. So this is a murder marker. This memorializes a murder of a 17-year-old student. She was on her way to school, Josie was. Usually she'd go with her brother or go with a friend, but for some reason I think they left a little too early for her that morning. So she cut through the forest to get to school, never arrived. So they put out a search party, found her almost immediately in the forest, brutalized and dead. They found the murderer actually pretty fast. It was a man named LePage. He was an itinerant woodcutter, lumberjack kind of guy. And he was basically hiding out in Pembroke. He had a line of bodies behind him, basically. It was really easy to figure out who did it and the motive and all that kinds of stuff. In fact, he was executed in Concord about 3 years later. So it was at 1878 he was executed in Concord. So all that is, you know, unfortunately, murders aren't odd. They're not so rare that they're abnormal. But erecting a death memorial is interesting to me. She's buried nearby. Her cemetery is nearby. She has a name on her stone, all that kind of stuff. But the people of Suncook/Pembroke were so moved they wanted it memorialized. But it gets weirder than that. So if we go around to the side of the monument to another inscription, it says this. This is the one not facing the road. Body found 90 feet north at Stone Hub. Head found 82 rods north at Stone Hub. So there's a lot to unpack in these 4 lines of inscriptions. So let me try to unpack those for you. One is she was found decapitated. So that's, you know, a grisly fact of it that in this true crime era we like to hear. But they put her right in the monument. They wanted you to know that she was beheaded. So I'll get to maybe some reasons why here in a second. So that's one thing to know in chiseled in stone. Second is they give you directions to those 2 points, the point where her head was found and the point where her body was found. They give you very specific directions how to find it. The third thing to unpack is, in case you couldn't find it on your own, they marked it with stone hubs. So if you go back in the woods behind this monument, you will see these 2 markers that mark the spot where her head was found and the spot where her body was found. So my assumption, so I have 2 ideas around this, and they could both be true. But one is just that 19th century people just had a much more practical attitude toward death. Like these were just the facts of the death. And infant mortality was a lot higher. People's lives didn't last as long. They were much closer to death than we are here. You can just see here in 2020 with COVID how just we're not prepared to handle death as a modern society. We're just not prepared to handle it. But in the 19th century, they just knew it was so inevitable that they kind of came to terms with it. So part of me thinks maybe they were just putting down the facts as they were. I mean, it's a murder memorial. Why would you just say she was murdered without giving the facts of the murder? So there's that. But there's also the possibility that the people were so shocked and so saddened by this, which they definitely were. That's not up for debate, I don't think, but that they were so shocked and saddened that they wanted everybody to be just as shocked and saddened when they come to this monument. So they wanted people in 2020, when they come to the Josie Langmaid Monument, to know all these grisly details so they can feel almost freshly and anew what the people of Pembroke felt when they found Josie Langmaid's body. They wanted that shock, that sadness. So they gave us every single grisly detail. And it works. It definitely works. You're basically walking, if you follow the directions, you're walking through a crime scene that's, whatever, 170 years old, but a crime scene. And you can tell it's the opposite of what we would do today, right? Today, we polish away all the bad stuff, right? The stuff we put on graves is beloved father, loving mother. We don't put the salacious or the bad stuff. We try to ignore that. Even after death, we don't even put, although I've seen it before, we don't even put cause of death on tombstones. Like, even if it says a natural causes, we just don't do it. We just don't do it. It's not the thing we want to think about when we think about a person. But back then, it was part and parcel to what a person was. So that's it. That's the Josie. That's what we would have missed if we just thought this was a civic monument that honored the founders, or some body of people that we kind of don't care about anymore. It is a very personal story, a very real story, and they just did a great job. I mean, I've seen memorials for mass tragedies that were cold compared to this. That you didn't even get a sense of the tragedy because it was just so cold and coldly designed and coldly presented. But this tragedy of this murdered 17-year-old resonates. Just one inscription and it resonates. So we got one more to go, and I'm staying in this vein. I don't know why I ended so morbidly, but I'm staying in this vein. We're gonna go to New Boston, 23 miles away, to New Boston Cemetery. Now, New Boston Cemetery, so we started in the graveyard, and I want us to end in the graveyard. Just a nice little parallel. New Boston Cemetery is one of those beautiful cemeteries. You can come here and walk it. It's got animals. I rarely go to a big New England cemetery that I don't see, a fox or a turkey or a deer, definitely birds. Lots of old stones, lots of history, lots of story. It's a great cemetery to just take a walk through. Really great one. And if you're taking a walk through it, you might come across Sevilla Jones's stone, or you might not, because it's not a boring stone, but it fits in. It's just a square of stone that, just like all the other squares of stones around it, or rectangles of stone. Has all the usual stuff. Daughter of George and Sarah, has her expiration date. She was 17 years old, similar to Josie when she died. But then you look right in the middle of this epitaph, and it says, "Murdered by Henry N. Sargent." So a lot more unpacking to do. So she's murdered. So they put the cause of death and the murderer on the epitaph. So this Henry Sargent, this murderer, shares this epitaph with Sevilla Jones, which blows my mind. Like, again, we would never do this, right? We would not want the name of the perpetrator anywhere near the memorial of our loved ones. But and I've seen this before. I've seen graves that accuse people of murder, where either the person got away or nobody was found, or the person maybe wasn't actually murdered. They just wanted to take it out on somebody. But in this case, they do that as closure, right? They put that on there as closure. In this case, closure wasn't really needed because it was a pretty open and shut case. What happened was Henry Sargent was trying to court Sevilla Jones. He was a suitor of her, but he wasn't the only one. This is a classic love triangle. There was another suitor. And then Henry Sargent found out that other suitor, that Sevilla liked that other suitor a little better. Then he found out that the parents were also pushing Sevilla toward this other suitor. So he realized he had no chance. He realized it was not a triangle anymore. It was two people, and he was just a third wheel. So he pulled the cliche, if I can't have you, nobody can. He walked up to her, shot her 4 times. She died. He then shot himself. The story goes that he didn't die right away. The doctor came, but when the doctor found out what he did, he refused to treat him. And then Henry Sargent dies hours later. So it was a successful murder-suicide. But I wonder, it's again, the parents who were right buried beside her, obviously were in such kind of shock and sorrow that they felt this had to be done, right? We have to call out that it was unfair that she has a gravestone that says 17 years and 9 months. Unfair. So we're going to put the reason why it's unfair right on here. So it's interesting. It's an interesting idea. It gets more interesting when you walk 100 steps past this and you find Henry Sargent's grave himself. So but it doesn't say murdered Sevilla Jones on his gravestone at all. It just says son of Daniel and Charlotte, died this day, age 23 years. So this is a good example to me, though. So I could tell you the story. I just told you the story, actually. I could tell you the story. You could read the story. You could listen to Fritz Weatherby tell the story on Chronicle. And it's a story. It's just a story. But if you go to the graveyard, there are physical pieces of this story. The actual players are right here, all of them. The parents, the suitors, the victim, the murderer, they're all right here. And it makes the story real. These physical touches make the story real, make it not history, but a story, but not a personal story. Like, these people were real people. It wasn't just like words in a history book, real people. And that's what I love about all these sites, is kind of making history real and having something physical to go to, and also just being able to get in my house on a Saturday and go do something is a lot of fun. But that's it. Now, to be fair, I need to get us all the way home. So that's another 21 miles to my home in Nashville. Welcome to my home. Now, the big question is, did we do it? Did we do it and make it a practical trip? So let me show you what the trip looked like. Very robust. We circled Lake Winnipesaukee. We made it to the coast. We were in southern New Hampshire. A nice trip. This is a nice trip. Nice looking trip, at least from a map's perspective. But the question is, did we do it on tank of gas, and did we do it in a practical amount of time? So those are the questions. How far did it take us? How long did it take us? So the mileage, the exact mileage, everything, every twist and turn, going down the road in Tamworth twice to get to the Madison Boulder and back, 256 miles. That means we still have 50 miles, or 44 miles of gas left in our tank. So we're not coming home on fumes. There's no technicality about this. We did it. In fact, I could have added another 40 miles of trip and added 2 more oddities onto this trip really easily, without even straining my resources. Really easy. Hinnaker, I could have added Hinnaker, right? That's Ocean-born Marys and Hinnaker. Could have added that on here. But the other thing about making this a real trip and not just kind of a hypothetical one is the time it takes to do it, right? So this is how long the drive, this is just pure driving time, 6 hours and 22 minutes. Now, if you add in stop time, now you notice a lot of these stops are pretty quick. You get out, you pay your respects, you get out, you walk around a little bit, other than the Far Out Diner. If you hung out there, it's probably an hour or 2 hours. But if you didn't do that, very quick stops. So let's say you add 2.5 hours worth of stops on this trip. I'll say 2.5 hours, which is probably about right, honestly, unless you really like one of the sites and just hang out there forever. So that puts us at 9 hours. That's a work day. There are people that sit behind desks for longer than that. That means if you leave at 8 in the morning, which isn't even crack of dawn, it is a reasonable time to leave, you're home by 5, which means you have the rest of the day to mow the lawn, to do the garden, to binge watch a Netflix series. Do whatever you want. You kind of earned it with this trip. I mean, this experience you had. And, it's a Saturday morning. You just learned 8 stories firsthand, saw some wonders, and just kind of really lived that morning and really explored New Hampshire. And again, without even using an entire day of your weekend. That's also very important to me because, I work during the week, so I can't do this anytime I want to. I want to tell you just a few more facts about this trip we just took together. One is, as you noticed, all the sites are free, unless you ate at Far Out Diner. All the sites are free. So literally it cost less than a tank of gas to this trip. So very economical. Farthest point away was only 2 hours, 108 miles. That was the Madison Boulder. What that means is if you have an emergency or something happens or you just get tired, you're never farther than 100 miles away. You could have been back in 2 hours. And that was the farthest point in time. Most of the spots are much closer than 2 hours home. The average between stops was 28.4 miles, which means you never got bored on the road. This is important because, well, it's important for me because I have 3 kids. If I'm driving too far, I'll hear it. But it is important because every time you get in the car and I only have 28 miles to go to the next stop, it's a countdown. And the kind of anticipation builds. You're like, it's really the boring parts of the trip, which are in the car, are nothing. So that's why I love doing like every half hour an oddity. And that only works because, the riches of New Hampshire and the riches of these places that you can stop every half hour. You probably stop quicker than that, actually. And that's my last point, actually, because I could erase all 8 of these stops and replace them with 8 other ones and not change this route very much, really easily. In fact, I started out when I just trying to plan this one, I think I had 24 sites that I whittled down to 8. But then if you move this circle 10 degrees this way or 10 degrees this way or flip it, you have a whole new section of New Hampshire full of oddities and wonders. So it's flexible. It's like, I don't know, but again, I'm just trying to prove that thesis to you. I'm probably beating it into the ground that within a tank of gas are untold wonders and oddities and strange sights. So I won't do the big pitch. If you want to read more of my stuff, go to oddthingsIhaveseen.com. Hundreds of articles from my time in New England, across the country, across the world. All my books are in Amazon and they're at independent bookstores. So definitely if you want to buy those. Cursed Objects, just like Trisha said, is coming out September 15th. I already have my my author's copy with the shiny metal foil cover. Definitely if you're interested in that, you can pre-order it right now from Amazon or your independent bookstore and you'll have it before September 15th. Highly recommend that. And then the last thing I want to say is, if you really like this trip, send me an email and I'll send it to you. If you go to oddthingsIhaveseen.com, my email is everywhere. And then if you want to see the trip, I can send you that exact maps. It has all the addresses, all the GPS, distance between them, everything you need to just jump in your car and follow it. It's a Google My Map. So it's interactive. It's all that kinds of things. So I will send that to you if you want it. Just send me an email and I'll give it to you. And that's it. Thank you guys for sitting through that. I know it's weird just staring at a couple of squares on the screen, but I really appreciate you guys coming and listen to me babble about stuff you can drive to. You're on mute, Trisha. Oh, I gotta stop sharing too, don't I?
There I am. Yeah. Okay, so we've already got a few questions in the chat, and I received some questions by email, so I'm gonna start asking. So the first question, I received some questions from Ashley, and she wanted to know what the creepiest sites are. So not necessarily closest to you in New Hampshire, but what are the scariest, creepiest, spookiest sites?
In New Hampshire? Oh, that's a good question. So
I feel like that Josie Lang made is maybe a contender. That was
that's another brilliant thing about New Hampshire and New England in general. We have some very morbid stories because the colonials were all really morbid people. I mean, they're Puritans, so they had like a lot of beliefs around supernatural stuff and death, and they weren't afraid of death, so they can put skulls right down there. So the New England graveyards the New Hampshire graveyards especially are the best. I mean, to walk, when I take somebody from out of town to a New Hampshire graveyard and they see a skull with wings on the top of it, they think they're on a movie set. They thought that those things didn't exist. But we know in New England that they're everywhere. They're everywhere. I've seen gravestones with coffins engraved on them, with snakes, with bats, and they're real. And they're historic. They're not even like a set. But that's a good one. I'm trying to think in the top of my head what the spookiest New Hampshire site would be. Other than that, let me think about that. There's definitely some. New England is great for the spooky spots.
And we also had a question in the chat. Favorite cemetery in New Hampshire? I have favorite cemeteries also.
There's so many. My joke always is
there's definitely a right answer. So
yeah, my joke always is I can't. On my trip to the grocery store to Hannaford, I passed 3 historic graveyards just because we have so many. They're just like shoved everywhere. I'm a big fan of. Oh, and it just left me. The graveyard where Alan Shepard, the astronaut, has a cenotaph. That graveyard has some amazing looking skulls. So that's the other cool thing about New England graves is, depending on the sculpture, all the skulls look different. And the ones in this graveyard and it just passed me. It's an H-town. They all look like Jack Skellington. They're all circles with big eyes and a line. Sorry, say it again?
Is it Hollis?
No, the other direction. It's
Hampton.
Yes, I think that's where it is. So that's a really good one. Just look up wherever Alan Shepard. He's not buried in there, but his family's buried there. He is a cenotaph, which is a plaque marking not his body. His body is somewhere. I think he was scattered in the West Coast, but he has a cenotaph mentioning him. And if you go there, it has some spook stories. It has some really cool graveyard art, and of course, he's the famous guy in the cemetery.
Okay, well, I'm going to use moderator's discretion here to tell you that my favorite cemetery in New Hampshire is Point of Graves in Portsmouth.
That's a good one. That is a really good one. I like that one a lot too.
Just off Prescott Park, and it has some of the oldest and most beautiful at the 17th century, early 18th century. If you want the skulls with wings, it's
yeah, and it's surrounded by old buildings, which is a great backdrop, and obviously it's within smelling of the sea, which gives us like a graveyard at the sea is like, well, what else do you need out of life? Well, a lot more things, I guess, but I'm just gonna say that.
I see John in the chat mentioned the birthplace of Mudgett.
Yes,
H.H. Holmes, right?
That's a good one. If I could go inside that one, I might say that's the spookiest place. So he's the serial killer H.H. Holmes, who made his infame in Chicago with the Chicago murder castle, which was a giant hotel he built that was basically one giant murder weapon. There were like gas chambers, there were hidden trapdoors. People would come to Chicago, get a room, and never leave. And because they were far away from home, this was like the 19th century. It was the best place to get bodies, and he would deflesh them and sell them. But he's a New Hampshireite. I always say, like, when I tell people he's a New Hampshireite, then I bring up like Alan Shepard and all the good, Christina McAuliffe and all the good people we have in New Hampshire to make up for H.H. Herman. But his house is right downtown Gilmanton. There's only like 3 buildings in the historic center of Gilmanton. It's like a church, a school, and a big white house. And that house is his birth home. So I think he went to school too. So that's what makes a murderer, is that town in Gilmanton.
And there's a great book about him, Devil in the White City.
Yeah, really good.
Came out a while ago, many years ago now, I guess. So question from Susan in the chat. How do we go about finding oddities during our roaming? Any suggestions? Google research, pull over when you see a sign. What are your tips?
Yeah, so I really know this a lot. So there are some great resources online. Back when I started this, there weren't as many, but there are now. If you go to Atlas Obscura, they have a bunch of stuff in New Hampshire. You go to Road Trippers, they have some. That's another online site. You go to Roadside America is another great site. And what those will give you some pretty strong ones. But what I find, when I find the ones that really excite me, the more obscure ones or things that astound me, it's just keeping my ears open to local media, watching Chronicle or reading the Telegraph, or just, those will slip in. And then the second I hear them, I immediately I type up a bookmark and I make sure I can go find them. But the big sites will tell you some good stuff to go to, but always the best stuff is from somebody local. Or I'm a little bit privileged here, but when I do a talk, people always email me afterwards or come up to me and tell me stuff, and then and they'll go find that stuff. So that's a big help. But obviously, you go to Otis. It's also sorted by state. So I have a section on New Hampshire, a bunch of sites you can see in New Hampshire. The New Hampshire Magazine article, there's like probably 24 sites there. So it's out there. There's enough to get you going for sure.
I had a couple requests for specific locations, Bristol, things around Jackson, a couple specific places.
Yeah, hold on. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, and on your website too, I think you can.
Yeah, so what I've done, just because this is my thing, I have a map, a personal map that I built that has about 5,000 sites in the country that I want either have seen or want to see, and so I have like New Hampshire that just pins everywhere. I don't even think I know where Bristol is, honestly.
Oh, you do, because that is where the summer home that Aleister Crowley stayed in is. Right near Bristol.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that was actually on our route. That was near that's Hebron, right? Over by.
Yeah. Yep.
So I literally could. So that was the famous occultist that's like world renowned. Spent like 3 months in New Hampshire just doing magic stuff. But that could have been on our route. That was one of the things on our route that I could have just swung out another 20 miles and picked up and gone to see his house. So that's out there. Jackson, the only thing I have is Storyland, which you guys already know about. But that's an amazing place. Like I try not to let people sleep on like the mainstream stuff. I mean, we have a Christmas themed amusement park. That's crazy. I don't know. I know people in New Hampshire grew up with that, but that's amazing that you can just go have Christmas anytime you want. So stuff like that, I definitely still I want to appreciate as well.
So Carol in the chat mentioned the Smutty Nose murders on Smutty Nose Island, and I know that's another good, and that's right. That is in the ocean.
Yeah,
you could actually leave the continental U.S. and visit the island, visit Smutty Nose Island for that.
Yeah,
one.
Smutty Nose is always fascinating. I mean, there's a few sites you can check. So it was a murder that happened, I think, 19th century, out on this rock of an island, out in the Isle of Shoals, which is half of it is Maine, half of it is New Hampshire, and the murder happened out there. But the victims, the two women who were axed to death, they're in a graveyard in Portsmouth. You can actually go see their graves, and then the grave of the guy who did it. He's buried in a prison cemetery in Maine, out behind. The prison's not there anymore, but the prison cemetery is still there. And there's actually a gift shop filled with stuff made by prisoners that you can shop at. And behind that is an old tiny prison graveyard, and his gravestone is right there as well. So that's another part of these stories is you can piece them together physically. Like if even all the players left traces behind, the sites left traces behind. So one of my favorite things is to put together all these sites into one story, which is kind of what Poland's about. I put all of Poe's sites on the East Coast and London together in one story, but you can do it with small stories too. It's like really a lot of fun.
Yeah, and if you're in Portsmouth and you go out to Smutty Nose, you can also go to the Portsmouth Athenaeum and see the actual axe that was used in the murders, which I have seen, and it is actually really gross and creepy. It is chilling.
Yeah.
So Ken asks, have you ever been to the Clinton Tunnel in Clinton, Massachusetts?
I have.
To know the email for your contact for the routes of the trip.
Sure. So I'll give the email first. It's really easy. If you look at my tag, JW Ocker, so my email is okerjw at Gmail. And I think that's because I think I got JW Ocker and then I forgot my password back in the early days of Gmail. So I couldn't get it back. So now I'm okerjw at Gmail. But yeah, Clinton Tunnel I've been to. That's a great one because it's an abandoned railroad tunnel right on the side of the road in Clifton near the dam. And you can walk through it today. And you walk through the first half and it's all stone. And you get deeper in there and it turns into natural rock. And at the very end of it is just like wasteland. But it's so atmospheric and so great. And like, it's one of those things that you take a picture of it and it's like all the ruins kind of stuff that people like to see. It's one of those things. But yeah, I've been there. Took my family there. We walked, me and my little girls walked through that tunnel.
So there's a question from Matt. What about America's Stonehenge in Salem?
Yeah.
Can you shed light on that? What on earth is that place?
So yeah, it's very bizarre. So that I actually visited. So I'm actually not from New Hampshire. I've lived here for maybe a dozen years. I'm from the Mid-Atlantic, but on my first road trip through New England, one of the first things I saw was America's Stonehenge because that's the number one New Hampshire oddity you hear about outside of New Hampshire is you hear about America's Stonehenge. So America's Stonehenge, I like it. I like the site, but it's a little disappointing if you go in thinking of it as America's Stonehenge because it's a pile of rocks that aren't as big as the sarsen stones in England at all, not even close to it. But the idea is that nobody knows what it is, right? That's the mystery of it. It's on a place called Mystery Hill, and all the theories around it are what makes it fun. So the theory is it's a Native American structure, even though they didn't really do that back then, up here at least. The theory is that it's pre-Columbus Europeans, Vikings or something like that, came over before Columbus and built it, because they did build stone structures like that. There's ideas that it's just root cellars that the colonials have. And the real true story is one of the guys who owned it in the chain of ownership, he mixed up those stones. He moved them around. He made his own shapes out of it. So it's not really a valid archaeological site anymore, but that doesn't change how cool that story is. I love hoaxers. Like, I follow P.T. Barnum sites all over the place, and I follow like those guys. For that site of America's Stonehenge to still exist today as a tourist attraction is a great story to me. Like, I don't care about the truth of where it came from, which is muddled beyond knowledge. It probably was just colonial root cellars that somebody played Legos with and made cool structures out of. But it's that story. That new story is just as good as if it had been, not if it had been pre-colonial or pre-Columbus Vikings, but pretty cool, pretty better than anything else, I think.
An early tourist trap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it has its own history now. It's been a tourist site for like a long time. So at some point that becomes historic.
I'm gonna. I see Maureen has her hand up, so I'm going to unmute and see if that works. Marlene, you might have to unmute yourself, but you can ask.
Unmute.
Yes, you got it.
Okay. Thank you. Hi. So here's my question. What's your favorite oddity where pets are friendly? Pets are welcome.
That's a good question. So, yeah, because a lot of cemeteries do not let you bring pets for various reasons. But here's the thing, there are pet cemeteries that are really amazing and historic in New England. There's quite a few. Massachusetts has a bunch, honestly, that are like, they've one that dates back to the 19th century that has the dogs that belong to Lizzie Borden and has like an Arctic explorer dog, like famous celebrity dogs in this pet cemetery. And they let you bring pets into the pet cemetery because, why not?
But I don't mean cemeteries, because I know of some. There's one in New York, the Hartsdale Pet Cemetery.
That's a good one.
Famous, I think.
Yeah.
I think Checkers is there, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I liked his owner, but that's besides the point. But do you have any other spots where you could just go with your pets that you think are really unique?
Yeah, I find ghost towns are that way. A lot of times the New Hampshire ghost towns and New England in general, but New Hampshire ghost towns are in forests and they're on hiking trails that are completely pet friendly, often camping friendly too. And they're not, and I say ghost towns, what they usually are cellar holes. Sometimes they have historic signs, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's like mill ruins, but they're not. You don't have to like hike through jungle to get there. They're usually pretty. I'm not that adventurous. I'm not the kind of guy who's like whatever machetes and living in the water for 3 days looking for an oddity. But there's lots of ghost towns in the White Mountains that you can just walk to. I just went to one a couple of weeks ago that it was like less than a mile walk round trip, and it was gorgeous. It was on a river. It was by a waterfall, and the path was paved. There's a graveyard there. There's remnants of the town graveyard and remnants of the town mill, like a big metal wheel on top of the stone structure, and of course stone walls. There's always stone walls in the forests of New England. That one was Thornton Gore. Thornton Gore is what that was. And you park around the side of the road and you walk less than a mile to get to it, or walk your dog there.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna go one more question. Favorite ever site in the U.S. Favorite odd site in the entire United States?
Oh, that's a rough one. That is a really, really rough one. So part of the problem with this gig, I'll tell you guys up front, is my notion of odd is skewed now. So when I do these presentations, I almost don't know what to pick anymore because I don't know what other people find odd, because I'm a little bit jaded to what is odd, and what I find odd sometimes nobody else finds odd because I don't know, it's new to me. But in the entire United States, man, the problem is, man, I do not know. I don't know. But I will say that New England is my favorite spot for this kind of stuff. And I say that because I moved here. Reason why I moved to New England is because I love New England. And the reason why I moved to New Hampshire is because I got a job there. But also my old roommate was from Nashville. So, but if it is the coolest sites are all in New England. I go to the West Coast for like movie locations. You know, there's some cool spiritualist stuff all over New York, but the New England graveyards and the New England historic sites and the New England murder stories are the best in the country. I mean, there's a kind of a joke going around that, you know, 9 out of 10 horror authors are from New England. And that's because, you know, we just have that kind of, it's the creepiest section of the country, especially in fall. You know, that's kind of another big reason why I moved up here. But if you, I know it's a cop-out answer, but I would suggest if you go to my site and just kind of go at random, it's probably there. It's probably on the site, my favorite one.
Yeah, New Hampshire definitely has a lot, so we're lucky that we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're pretty much out of time, so I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you to J.W. Ocker for his talk. These programs are brought to you in part with funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And if you would like to support our work, including these online Humanities to Go programs, you can go to our website, nhhumanities.org/give. While you're there, you can sign up for our newsletter, Human Ties, where we send you humanities content and information about our upcoming programs. And after tonight's program, you're going to receive another email from me with a link to take a survey, and we appreciate your feedback. We hope you'll join us for more programs coming up. And I can tell you, this is an announcement that's going out today. We're going to host a virtual celebration of hope and resilience. So instead of our annual dinner this year in person in Manchester, we're going online, and that'll be on October 22nd. You can find details about our virtual celebration on our website and tickets for it, nhhumanities.org/celebrate. So thank you everyone for joining us. Special thanks to J.W. Ocker for telling us these amazing tales and delighting us all. So thank you very much, and we hope we'll have you back again soon.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for coming. I really appreciate that.